So, hello everybody, I'm Jayel Draco. I'm the co-founder of Oneshi Press, an independent comic book publishing company. We also publish illustrated novels and novellas and a whole bunch of other fun stuff. If you haven't checked out our booth, please do so. We've got something for everyone.
I'm Tess. I'm the founder and creator of Shadowcast Studio, and I've been self-publishing comics ever since the inception. And I've been collaborating with Oneshi Press and making comics, from comic strips to graphic novels to little short comics as well too. And I've made a lot of mistakes along the way that I hope you learn from.
So, yeah, that's the name of this panel, right? Mistakes we made in comics?
Oh yeah.
So what's the point of this panel? I just saw my name on it and I was like, oh shoot, I guess I better get there.
It's to tell stories and little anecdotes of mistakes we've made in comics to let future creators learn from our mistakes, but also a sort of behind the scenes amount of work that we do for readers of just like, we definitely fuck up every now and again. Like, okay. That's just that's the facts.
So I have an example. Like, in baseball, not that I know much about baseball, I don't, but hear me out. Like a winning team, sometimes they'll like take the last ball, right, and they'll throw it into the crowd. I found out that is not acceptable in bowling. Sorry. That had nothing to do with comics, but it is a mistake that you should learn from other people and not firsthand, It's
sort of the comics blooper reel, if you will. I'm gonna have to say, I'm gonna start off with a big mistake, which was I drew out the comic before getting editing or like a second pair of eyes to see if the joke hits or anything like that. Like back when I did comics for Apostrophe magazine, I would draw out the comic, I'd let people ask them, hey, do you think this is funny? Like, what do you think of this and that? And then I'd have to, like, I couldn't go back to change the whole comic because something didn't work. So that's why I do write the script, and then I ask people whether it works or not before I start drawing. Because drawing takes a lot of work. Not to say that writing doesn't, but there's keys on the keyboard that are a bit easier to press to delete things.
Well, along those lines, thankfully, I got to learn from mistakes of others. I worked at a comic book studio for about a decade or so. We did stuff for Marvel, for DC, for Image, for Dark Horse. I worked for a very well-known comic book publisher, or comic book artist and writer. And I did see a lot of mistakes that were made when he was no longer a freelancer working for the big two and was just doing what he wanted. Surrounded himself by yes sir type people, and he really got to Cherish.
Oh my god, freaking horse, I love it.
All right, I'm gonna have to go meet Cherish in person because I've been seeing pictures of this horse for like the last, I don't know, several years at least.
Fucking magnificent.
So yeah, one of the biggest problems was he thought he was so good at writing that he didn't need an editor. And anyone that thinks that is not a good writer. Like, all writers need an editor. I don't care if you're writing a menu for your restaurant, you need an editor. If you're writing a business card, you need to run it by an editor.
Oh, I can
Everybody who writes anything that's going into print needs an editor. But he was just like, what do you think I am, an amateur? I don't need an editor. And his work was just full of A, mistakes, and B, things that should have been run by a sensitivity consultation. Sensitivity consultations are just as important as editors. If you are writing about something that you personally have not experienced, you need to hire someone who has experienced it, pay them, and have them tell you what you're doing wrong, because I promise you're doing something wrong. So yeah, sensitivity consultations and editors, those are two big things that I saw firsthand not being used, and the results were disastrous. To watch someone in their second half of their career destroy the name they made for themselves in the first half of their career was just awful. It was sad.
as Ariana Grande's song "I Set Fire to the Rain" starts playing as this man just destroys his career. It's always good to have a second pair of eyes, or 2 to 3, 4 pairs of eyes if necessary, on your work. Because first, even like, okay, with writing, I always feel like the first draft is you telling yourself the story, aka vomiting your brain juice all over the page, and then you go through it a couple times, and then you bring it to an editor, and maybe even 2, and a sensitivity reader if necessary.
Can you describe the path of how brain juice gets from your head to your stomach to vomit out?
So it's like a bird. You kind of shake it around a little bit. Like first you consume things and you think about it and you mull it and pickle it in your brain. And then you just sort of shake it out until you're so excited about it, you have to vomit it out. You gotta like get it out on the page. It's like The Exorcist, where you've had this in your head for so long that you just furiously type it on the...
So I think a big mistake is people don't mull things over and keep it in their head for a while. And they just have their idea and go for it, hit the ground running.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the mulling it over before vomiting it out is really, really important, because even as you just go about your daily life and you're shopping or whatever, those ideas kind of gestate. There's some part of your brain that's pecking away at it, and the longer you let it do that work, the more thought it comes out with.
It's like a crock pot. You have your base ingredients, you put them in there, and you let it sit. So I started reading the Aragon series a couple years ago, and I think it has good ideas, but it definitely makes me think this person didn't let it sit in the crock pot for long enough, because I could still see big chunks of their influence / things that they need to work on to make it their own. But it was still good. I think there were moments that were great that I would have loved to see expanded on, but this was from like a 16-year-old, like 14-year-old, even younger.
That's wild.
Yeah,
That's
so like,
wild.
and
Amazing. And I mean, that's prodigy material, for sure.
He just needed to let it sit in the cooker for a couple more years. Just let it simmer, and have more people come in and say like, hey, I see you love Earthsea, Aragorn, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and a couple of other pieces, and I think these are all good to like sort of simmer in. Yeah.
So was that his mistake, or was that his editor/publisher's mistake?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think there's probably a few things at play there. I mean, when you're that young and you don't really have the lived experience to understand the decisions that you're making, I think at that point it really falls upon the people around you to provide that guidance. But often the problem is the people around you are just amazed that you're doing that and have no experience themselves, so they're not necessarily going to be able to provide that kind of guidance. And editors typically, I mean, they're hired on to a project. By the time that project is on their desk, they're like, oh, what is this? They're not like necessarily going to your house and having tea and talking about it first, you know? So we could say maybe an agent could have talked about that, or someone in a position of guidance. But, you know, honestly, it did well, so maybe it's not a mistake at all. It's just like, there are things that, if they were mulled over longer, could have been smoothed out. But it's still really well-loved piece of, literary material that I think is a great addition to pop culture. You know, so maybe it's not a mistake at all, really.
Oh, no. I guess that was just me being an asshole. I guess...
Bravo!
I guess it was also just me going like, oh, I remember when I used to write like this. This is so nostalgic. Oh. Again, me being an asshole. I think one other thing that I think about in my early parts of creating comics is I made the panels too small. I try to cram in as many panels as I could on a page. And you need to give panels room to breathe. And
dialogue.
And dialogue. You need to like brevity and dialogue as much as you can. And I know there's like big monologues I had in my head that I tried to cram in. That doesn't work. And I think and
if it does work, if it's necessary, you can break it up and tell it over the course of several pages. Rather than trying to fit that monologue into one page, make that monologue a chapter. Right?
Yeah.
Spread it out and trim the fat.
really, it's trimming the fat, and also I tried to. I didn't go to like classes for comic specific. Like I had a comic book club, but I didn't have a comic book class that talks about okay. The best way to make a comic is to try and make it 8 pages at first. Maybe 16 if you're bold. Don't try and make it 56 or anything like beyond that for a chapter. And me being a dingus was like, I'm gonna write this as though I'm writing it for a television episode, which is a different format. So having someone and people coming up and talking about, hey, this is the usual format for the comics industry, I think is really important. So if you want to step into comics or anything like that, definitely start with 8 pages.
Always do, like, actually, you should probably even do like a 2-pager first, and
Yeah.
then a 4-pager, and then an 8-pager.
Yeah.
The most common mistake is people are like, I want to write a comic, and I want it to be the best thing ever, so I'm going to write a 9,000 page long comic. And it's like, all right, or maybe 200, 300 pages long even. But like, you just can't do that your first time out. You have to see what works on a page and what doesn't before you can write 300 pages. You know, like if you haven't even written 1 page, that's like trying to run before you can crawl. And it's really common, and a lot of times people get these huge projects as their first project, and they want it to be their opus when they haven't even done a single comic yet. And I see it all the time. It's a recipe for disaster, and that often leaves people feeling like this creation process is not for me. I can't do it. I tried and failed. And so it's like, if your first experience is that much of a disaster, it can be really demotivating, and even to the point of debilitation. And so that's a really, really common mistake that people make. So that's why, you know, I work with a lot of first-time comic creators in the anthologies that I publish, and I always am like 8 pages, you know, 8 pages, keep it loose, like let your art speak for itself as best you can. You know, don't try to fit in more than 2 lines in a panel. Try to have some panels where there are no lines, if you can, you know. And it's always amazing how often people feel insecure about doing that, like they're not doing enough, and because of it, they end up doing way too much. And when they do way too much, it doesn't work.
I think it's for me, when I was growing up, I think I had like a mentality of watching cartoons and TV, and they have different formats as to figuring out how to tell a story and different tools. Whereas in comics, it's like conjoined twins. Like they have the same base, but they're doing their own thing at the top. This is a very weird conjoined twin, but I like it. His name is Steve and Bob. Steve and Bob doing their own thing. Brevity. Again, pantomime facial expressions always does great in animation as well too. If you can tell a story without speaking, like that's awesome. Brevity in story as well. Got to cut to the chase. Cut to the chase.
Cut to the chase.
Cut to the chase as best you can, and just let your art do the talking.
So, and I think, you know, in light of the fact that we already asked, most of you here are comic readers, but not necessarily comic creators, maybe hearing about the technicalities of things that we've found to be failures or errors in judgment. Some of that might be a little irrelevant, but do any of you have questions or thoughts or things that you've seen done in comics that bothered you, or, you know, anything like that? Hey, let's get it.
I'm kind of curious, you know, obviously there's like a lot of mistakes you two are like learning from and growing from, but often as humans, we're a little bit messier and often don't always improve from our mistakes. And I'm curious, as artists and creators, what your guys' bad habits in comics
For when I'm collaborating with someone else, I try and keep it brief. But for my works like Legend Catcher, I still make scripts that are a little bit long. Like page numbers a little bit longer than I need to. My last chapter that I finished up was 56 pages long. I drew all of that, and I learned, no, we need to keep it at like 30 at the most.
I think a bad habit of mine, which, you know, it's hard to say because it might be a habit that is actually effective in certain ways, but I do tend to go really hard on details that most people will never see. And so you have to question, how much time am I spending on these details, and what's the payoff? And is the payoff worth the time spent when I could have been getting more progress on the story done instead of spending so much time on a panel? However, I do think that maintaining that habit has gotten me a lot faster at drawing. So it's hard to say, because I could be moving at a much faster pace if I just kind of wasn't so neurospicy about it, you know?
That's the neurospicy part.
Yeah, the hyper focus.
I think that's also a part of why I write longer scripts, is because story is one of my special interests, in going like, but it's the pathos. I need to pace this out so it's effective at the end. And part of me is like, no, babe, that's turning into 100 pages. Slow down, cut it off, cut off the fat. Anyone else have anything?
So another thing that I like to do in terms of pacing is always write for 8-pagers.
Yeah.
So if you notice, a lot of my books are separated into 8-page chapters. Like the Pack comic book series has 3 8-page chapters. The Tracy Queen series has 4.5 8-page chapters. But there's always a beat after 8 pages. And this way, you're not trying to read the whole thing and then get to one payoff. But you know, for every 8 pages, there's going to be a payoff. There's going to be that beat. There's going to be a place to rest. You know, maybe you read it with your coffee in the morning, read 8 pages, then put it down, and then read the next 8 pages the next day. It's a lot easier to digest than trying to read something that's like 70 pages long with one payoff at the end, and you have to get there, you know?
It's kind of like binging a series versus what Disney did with The Mandalorian. They brought out an episode every week so that we can digest it a bit easier.
Yeah. And then I feel like afterwards you go back and binge it. you
Yeah.
know? So like you get those 8 pages, you take your time with it, and then you go back and have like the quick read through. Or you could do it the opposite way, you know?
These kids these days, they're too much access to streaming when we had to wait every week or even a month for a new episode of our favorite shows.
Streaming? I was lucky if I had a creek. Shit.
That's what my brother did in the backyard, was stream. It was a live stream.
So what are some other mistakes that you've noticed that aren't necessarily yours, without pointing fingers or casting aspersions on anyone else's work, but something that you think is like a common mistake?
I think a common mistake, especially with people trying to get into comics, is again, brevity is their first story. Just trying to make something that's less serious and not as like personal, but experimenting a little bit, because I think experimentation's important. And then of course, you know, it's the drawing part. Go to art classes. It's to stretch those artistic muscles when trying to draw. You don't have to replace your art, but it's going to help train your eye to make it better. Because and this was me as well. Like, this was little baby Tess going, but it's my style. Like, why would you want to replace my style? And I went, no. So I'm going to use the analogy. I took Taekwondo as one of my classes in college. Now, one thing we did for Taekwondo is we did stair drills. We would go up and down these stairs to strengthen our muscles in our legs, because it's a martial arts that uses legs. Now, we weren't doing that the entire class, but it helped us get the muscles in order to do the moves in that class, in Taekwondo. And that's the same for art. You learn to use reference, you learn to draw the human figure and figure out how we look and move, and you learn how to see something and then put it and stylize it the way you like to.
So my mentor, Jack Potter, he had an art class that he taught that was called Drawing and Thinking, a gym class for the mind.
Ooh.
And basically, his purpose there was to exercise your ability to draw rather than focusing on technique or skill, because those are things that vary from person to person. People have different styles, different signatures. Some people can do one thing really well and not so good at another, and that's all subjective. But as long as you are honing your own ability to think about drawing in a way that works for you and exercising that regularly, you as a creator, you get better at that. And so, just like athletes go to the gym and work out, artists need to do that too.
Yeah.
And I think, a lack of that can really hurt someone's confidence and motivation. And when someone takes on a big project and they're not feeling the confidence and motivation, that can suck. It could be demotivating, it can be painful, it can be anxiety inducing. There is a lot of anxiety that goes into art. Sharing stuff with other people that you've spent a lifetime developing.
That's another mistake I made. I learned the difference between a actual criticism and an opinion. And I learned that in an art class. So criticism is, here's a piece, a technique, or something to say that's going to make your stuff better, versus, I don't like this style, I don't like this art, I hate what you're doing. And I learned that in my fine arts class in the same room. So definitely.
Yeah, that's rough. That's a rough lesson.
And that's
but an important one.
Yes.
Important one.
That's both for writing and drawing. So if ever you are showing off to someone, kind of get a feel for who they are as a person and how they express their feelings on your work to you. It's seeing who's to take a grain of salt versus, oh, this is actually helpful.
It's that old saying, opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one and most of them stink. Pardon my language, sorry. How are we doing on time?
Let me take a look. See. We are at 2:22, which means we've got.
We're halfway?
Yeah, we're about halfway there.
All right. Does anybody have any other thoughts or questions or anything you've been dying to know or say?
Yes.
Something in comics that often will kind of pull me out of the comic is in speech bubbles. Italicized or capitalized words are often meant to show emphasis, like we do in real life with our speech patterns.
Sure.
Overuse of that though, where like every other word in every speech bubble. So when you're talking, it sounds like the character's talking like this.
Yeah.
That's how I end up.
You know what? Actually,
Yeah, so
reading a
that's-
script out loud might actually be a great way to figure that out.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times writers want to make sure that there's enough drama and use emphasis as a way to try to make it feel like there's a lot of importance happening. If every other word is bold, then every other word is important, right?
Right.
But it gets to that point where, like, someone who curses all the time, when they curse, you're just like, oh yeah, that's just Jayel being a fucking sailor, right? But, like, when Tess curses, it's like, oh shit, is everything okay? What happened? You know what I mean?
I was
So,
just
like,
in Eastern Montana.
yeah, like, when you don't emphasize a lot of things and then you do emphasize something, it really emphasizes it. There's a good balance to be had, because if you only emphasize like one word in your entire comic, people are going to be focusing on that word like, what does it mean? This is the cipher to the entire plot, right? So, like, you don't want to limit it too much, but there's definitely something to what you say about, like, if you're emphasizing every other word, nothing has emphasis anymore. And we also think, like, is this character, like, just going into like a caffeine coma? Like, what's happening here? You know, like did they just like
Someone
down
called
6
911.
monsters or something? You know.
And that's another, like reading it out loud or having speech to text read it, and so to hear it and say like, okay, does this sound like an edgy teenager, or does it sound like someone who's in a terrible situation right now?
Or does it sound like text to speech is malfunctioning? You know.
Did I break the robot?
Did I break the robot? That's what you got to ask yourself when writing.
When writing, did I break the robot?
And usually those decisions about what to emphasize, italicize, bold, etc., underline, those are usually in the script. The letterer rarely makes those calls. It's usually the writer doing that, not the letterer. And the letterer is supposed to follow the script whether they like it or not. It's the job. I have a good relationship with all the people that do my lettering, so I sometimes will be like, hey, what do you think? Or, you know, how would you do this? Or if they ask like, hey, Jayel, how do you want this handled? I'll be like, what do you think? Show me your judgment. Or just, hey, I trust you, you know. I do find that another big mistake in comics is writers not trusting their artists and micromanaging them to the point where the artist is no longer, their heart's not in it. And it shows, you know. I try not to micromanage anybody. Like if I hired someone for something, it's because I like what they do. And if I like what they do, I want them to do that and do it well. And I think comics is not a good game for big egos. It just isn't. It's a collaborative effort, and there's a lot of pieces, you know. Sometimes like I'll do penciling, have someone else do the inking, have someone else do the flatting, and then I'll maybe do the coloring, and then have someone else do the lettering. And when you have a team like that, like if you don't trust people, it's going to show in the final work.
It's communication. It's questioning.
Yeah.
Like when I did some inking on Children of Gaia cohorts, and if I had a question of like, what does this represent? Because I can't do a Rorschach test and assume.
Yeah.
So I would email JL and go like, what's this supposed to be, real quick, before
Right,
I draw
right.
this out, and
then
then he could fix it, and I could be like,
oh, I can re-sketch that for you and make it more clear, you know.
yeah.
Whatever.
Exactly, like the old saying of like to assume is to make an ass out of you and me. And I didn't get that for a while until I looked at the word itself. Ass. Ooh, me.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good question, or a good comment rather. Thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate that.
Does anyone else have anything to add in?
Well, on that same note, mistakes in comics.
Yeah.
Any mistakes you experienced or done or seen based on those interpersonal relationships on that team that caused a bad product to go out or anything like that?
I have seen it happen many times where, you know, people phoned it in, and, you know, sometimes like someone would get hired because their portfolio is great, and then the writer would micromanage them, and then the work would come out way subpar compared to the rest of their portfolio, because it's like that, what do they call it? Silent quitting?
Ooh, I've
Where-
never heard of that before.
Quiet quitting, where
Quiet
you don't
quitting.
really quit, you're just not really in it anymore. Like your heart quit, even though you're still in the seat working. Like, you know.
Stop getting the extra effort.
Yeah.
You're just doing to the letter. What
Exactly.
the code says.
Yeah, then you're just doing exactly what you have to and nothing more. And art is, it really shows when that's happening in art. That's a bad one. But also, you know, learning how to collaborate with people. There were times where working with people early on, I would argue for things to be done the way I imagined it, because that's how I imagined it. And at a certain point, you have to realize 15 people could imagine this thing and you'll get 15 different results. And assuming that your original idea is objectively better than someone else's is kind of a dick move, and it's gonna take their heart out of it. And you have to give a little. You have to be able to let the person you're working with also be part of the project. That's a difficult thing to learn for a lot of people.
I hired this person because of their work, not to be an extension of myself.
Right.
They are not a Muppet. I'm not putting my hand up their ass and making them do the thing. I'm trusting them to do this interpretation and to see how their creativity works out.
Yeah.
People are not Muppets, unless it's consensual.
Yeah, well,
That's a whole other panel. That's a not safe for work panel right there. Does anyone else have any other
any
thoughts?
ideas or thoughts? Yeah, let's hear it.
Just out of curiosity, I think, I think comics or any sort of kind of medium like this, it's interesting because it's this intersection of a certain level of like discipline and creativity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a challenging mixture for most people. I think that ends up stopping a lot of people from kind of growing and creating is this idea of like, you want to create and you have to create to make a product, you have to put work in. But to a certain extent, when you're putting work in that you don't necessarily have any, or if you have issues with like executive dysfunction,
Oh,
or
yeah.
your heart's not in it at the moment, that project fizzles out, or you even become resentful of it, being forced to work on it. But at the same time, the desire to create and make something is there, and that creativity can fluctuate. And what are things that you guys do that kind of help manage those fluctuations between the creative desire and these lulls in inspiration, or where you feel like you're kind of pulling teeth?
Yeah.
How do you manage that discipline within your art and your creativity?
For me, again, going back to like the gym class for the mind, I early on kind of played some games with myself and set up some rules. Like, I got a really nice Moleskine sketchbook and decided that I would draw on a page every day, and I would not turn that page until I considered it a complete work of art, and I would fill that sketchbook and then do the same exact thing on another sketchbook. And I just, every day made it a thing that like I would do this every single day. And, there were times where like looking back, some of them aren't great, that's fine. But it in and of itself showed me that I do always have the ability to muster and connect to that source. Most of it is just a mind game and just kind of, learning to get past those little tricks we play on ourselves. Like, what is the real reason I feel like I don't have it in me? What is the real reason that I feel like today I can't do it? And when we can discover those reasons, we can rewrite them, we can change them, we can use them to our advantage, we can incorporate it into our art even. And then, you get to a point where it's like, hey, I've been drawing so many times that like I can draw with my eyes closed. I can draw, I can draw after having a concussion. Like, you know what I mean? Like I'll just draw.
Are
It
you
doesn't
okay,
matter.
Jayel?
I am okay at the moment.
Okay.
I'm better than I was before. Thank you for asking.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think another thing that I do, and I really, really suggest this actually, is when I'm feeling my best, when I'm feeling my oats, that's when I do all my planning and all my big picture stuff, so that when I'm not feeling inspired, I can do the technical stuff and the fill-in stuff and the things that require less heart, and just technique. So like the stuff that requires heart, I do it when I'm having heart. This stuff that requires technique, I do that in between.
And that's actually touching on executive dysfunction, learning about how your brain works, because a lot of us are neurodivergent, like either coming to terms with it or knowing that for a long time and figuring out what works best for you and your brain, like playing different games to figure it out. I like to I like to rotate between projects every week. Like this week I'm going to work on this project, and then this week I'm going to work on the other one, and go between those for a little while. And I've been trying different techniques, including batching, which is I've done all my script writing in one go. Now I'm going to do all my thumbnails in one go and finish that. And recently, now I'm going to do all of my penciling, inking, all the pages, and then get to coloring and lighting and
That's
stuff.
what I do.
Yeah.
I always do that.
See, I didn't do that before. I was doing it one page at a time after the thumbnails going, and that was a mistake I learned. That was one of my mistakes.
You're continuously breaking your own flow.
Yeah.
Every time you switch tasks, that's
Yeah.
a major shift.
Yeah.
It's a shift in mentality, it's a shift in technique, it's a shift in focus. So yeah, doing all your thumbnails and then doing all your pencils, it's so much smoother.
Yeah, no, I did all my thumbnails, and then I would do like one page at a time of like pencils, inking, blah blah
Yeah.
blah.
Oh, I
And
can't do that.
Yeah, I used to do that, and now I'm like, I gotta do it.
And
this
you
way.
also get much more consistent work when you do
yeah
batches like that.
Yeah. Again, learning. But yeah, figuring out and rotating between. And I recently, because I'm learning how to try to advertise on social media. That's one thing I'm learning mistakes from. And my sister brought up the game we used to play, Dine and Dash. It's a game that talks about like getting urgent tasks done before, and then getting the tasks that take longer done later. And I'm learning that with trying to get more hype on social media.
I thought Dine and Dash was when you like eat a bunch of food and right before the bill comes you run out.
It is, but the
Okay.
game was just like, let's be cheeky about this.
Okay.
It is
So
actually
unrelated though, like
completely
it's an
unrelated.
analogy. Okay.
No, I don't like get a comic and then run from the comic book store. That's not okay.
Don't do that. That would be a mistake in comics.
But I'm trying to make it so that I make like a little drawing or an animatic, and then I can continue on the comic book chapter. Because again, for a long time, I've been so focused on getting the chapters done that my brain just would not switch over to getting a small thing done to sort of disperse and repost. So yeah, it's a lot of like playing around with your own brain, figuring out what works for you task wise, and always learning.
I actually do the same thing rotating projects, but I'll usually do like an entire issue from one series and then an entire issue from another series. This way it gives me enough time to like really get it out of my system. Like right now I'm working on volume 4 of Tracy Queen, and I've been working on it for months, and by time I'm done with it, I'm gonna be so glad to move on to volume 5 of Pack. It'll be nice and fresh. But by the time I'm done with that, I'll be so glad to move on to my next Children of Gaia project or whatever, you know. It's a way of keeping things fresh, keeping your motivation, and I think a lot of times it's easier for flash in the pan success to focus on only one thing and be known for that one thing. But I definitely see people burn out so hard when they do that. Like, they focus on one thing and become experts at it to the point where they don't even ever want to think about it, and that's all people ask them for. It's like a one-hit wonder band being asked to play that song at every single show that they do, and it's a song they wrote like 40 years ago, and they're just so sick of it, but they can't even get booked for a venue unless they play that song. You know, like, it takes the life out of it. It takes the fun out of it. So
You said a great term, rotating your crops,
yeah,
is a great analogy for that. You're rotating your crops. Does anyone else have anything to add to the conversation? Any questions? Any faux pas? Because I used to work traditionally too. Like, if any of you are asking, like, traditional versus digital. I've spilled so much ink. I've smeared as well. I've drawn pages because I have dry hands during certain seasons. I would draw and then a streak of blood would be across the page, and I'd have to look down and be like, oh, I literally put blood, ink, and tears into this.
One definite mistake is making sure that if you're using like a cup of water for your brushes or your pens, that it is a very, very different shape container than the one you have your drinking water in. Because I can't tell you how many times I've drank water that had like acrylic paint in it, or like, you know, watercolor in it, or ink in it, and it is not cool. It's just not cool. Don't do it, folks.
Games Workshop tastes delicious.
Oh yes, this is an acrylic from 1980, and this oil is 1800s. The oil is still so good. Oh, lovely.
If it's not from the acrylic region of Michael's, it's just, you know, colored paste.
Darling, I got a new bottle from Hobby Lobby for our anniversary. Oh my god.
It's chapters 6 through 7. I prefer chapters 5 through 8.
Oh, yeah. Oh, refined palate.
It's just like chewing through a book. This is so good. The paper cuts a little off, but it's really good.
What are some other common, like, I wasn't really prepared for a panel about mistakes, you know?
What about dynamic paneling? Like instead of just doing blocks across the page, have you ever read the Ruby comic by Rooster Teeth? They made a comic book.
No,
Sounds familiar.
I
If
didn't
you-
read
if
it.
you ever go into a bookstore and you find it,
Yeah.
read the first book, read that first chapter, entirely incomprehensible as to what's going on. You cannot,
Because the paneling is too
they tried to.
too interesting.
The first book is based off of, or at least the first chapter is based off of the Red Ruby trailer video, the first one that they made, which is Ruby just fighting a bunch of monsters in the field. But she has so much dynamic movement in it, and they tried to replicate that exactly. So if you've never seen the trailer video, you have no idea what's going on. throughout the
Right.
entire first
Yeah.
So there has been an established language in storytelling in the comic book medium that has developed, you know, and in the US it's different than in Japan. Like manga is reversed and a lot of the paneling sensibilities are different. But yeah, it is really important to understand that yes, you want to be creative, and yes, you want to be different, you want to leave your mark, you want to push the envelope a little bit, but not at the expense of your audience's ability to follow the story, right? So like telling the narrative has to be the first goal.
Clarity over pizzazz.
Yeah, I mean, right, what's that saying? When you want to hammer in a nail, you don't do anything fancy, you just hit the fucker on the head, right? You know, like,
I brought my good axe for this.
you know, I'm about to do a triple cartwheel somersault. Oh no.
No,
Somebody
no,
get
no,
the
no.
ice packs, you know.
Dude, how much Dragon Ball Z have you watched, my dude? Okay, you need to calm down. Oh my god, yeah. No.
And I do like to vary my panels, but I try to do it in ways like maybe this panel's overlapping that one, and then the next page it's separate or opposite, or you know, but there's still left to right going down the page. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
still what you would expect to be able to read if you have literally any experience reading comics, you know.
Yeah.
I've done some weird paneling and some cool like borders and stuff, but yeah, it's definitely a faux pas if you do it so interestingly that people have no idea what you're doing, you know.
Yeah.
Know the rules before you say that.
Exactly. If
Yeah.
you're breaking them or bending them intentionally as a plot point or as a device, awesome. But if you're breaking them because you literally just don't know what they are, it's gonna be a mess.
But Jayel, it's my style.
Yeah, your style is mess. Sorry, that was
It's
mean.
post-
That was mean. You're very neat. I love your style.
No,
It's-
no. I think that was a funny joke.
Okay, good.
I know you were joking. Hold on 1 second. I'm gonna check what time it is.
About 15 minutes left, right? Or
Yes.
no, 10 minutes left?
No. We got like
13.
17. We have 17 minutes.
Oh, do we go to the hour?
Oh no, we got 8 minutes. Yeah, you're right.
Now I'm so confused.
Depends if you looked at the app or the website.
Oh, you know what?
Interesting math. That's another thing. Common mistake in comics as an artist, just don't fuck with math. You know, like, let someone else do it. You know, stick to the pictures, right?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, this is faux pas. Don't do something for just exposure. Charge for your work.
Yeah.
Please. Exposure is what you die of in the desert.
I'll say I've done a lot of things for exposure. Before I had my teeth cut, you know, before I had my chops, like sometimes you got to do things for experience. Experience, exposure, getting your foot in the door, getting to know a crowd. But once you're at a level where you know you're professional, like, yeah, then it's fuck you, pay me, right? Or, okay, what are we gonna do? What are you gonna do for me? Like, you know,
Yeah.
we're either bartering or it's cash, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have this lovely chicken. Could you draw a portrait of said chicken before we kill it and put it in the roast?
Only if I can eat it.
I'll give you half of it.
Okay, that works.
Okay. Any other questions?
Although
or...
honestly, after I drew a portrait of a chicken, I don't know if I'd have the heart to eat it. I'd probably fall in love. I'd be like, no, I'm rescuing.
I did paint a rooster portrait because they got hit by a truck, and the owner was like, please paint this rooster. And I'm like, okay. It was very nice.
Did they eat it?
No, I bet it was squished by the truck.
Oh, okay.
There wouldn't be anything left.
No, she drew a portrait of the rooster eating the truck.
Oh, nice.
That would be cool. That'd be really
that's
cool.
A great idea.
And then that's the origin story of like the robot chicken. Well, one of the robot chickens, I guess. Does anyone else have any questions or?
Do you have any happy accidents or happy mistakes that you unintentionally made and then end up being a great mistake?
Ooh.
I honestly always allow for happy accidents. And in storytelling, it's typically referred to as emergent properties. Those are the properties that emerge that you did not expect and that you leave room for. And a big problem is in trying to be so controlling to having your original vision be the end result. You miss out on a lot of things that develop along the way. I'll tell you, actually, the coffee that we sell at our booth, that was an emergent property. You know, I had some cops in Pack were gonna meet up at a coffee shop, and I was like, all right, it's gotta be like a big franchise coffee shop. So I came up with Tarmux, and then it was like, all right, Tracy Queen's getting coffee, she's a coffee addict. So I was like, all right, let's use Tarmux for that. And then, you know, next thing we knew, it was just in everything we made, Tarmux coffee in the background. So we made the t-shirts, we made eventually the mugs and the cups, and people were like, all right, where do we get the coffee? And I was like, oh, fuck. So I made a lot of phone calls and figured it out, and I did end up getting the coffee made, but that coffee was an emergent property of storytelling. You know, it wasn't part of the plan, it was something that happened developmentally as a happy accident, and a lot of background characters because, oh, there needs to be a crowd here, and then I draw someone really interesting, and I'm like, you know what? That person's coming back. You know, I'm going to use that character again. Things like that, you know. I think the more you allow yourself to be free, the more creative you can be, because creativity is one of the ultimate expressions of freedom.
Yeah. And I would say sometimes, I think the way I draw mouths and I incomplete the bottom, sometimes that was a happy accident. I'm like, oh, I really like that. Or sometimes when I do fan art just to try and like stretch my brain, I did a fan comic and I put some text like an ah or a ha ha on the border of the bubble, and I'm like, I actually really like that. I'm going to incorporate that more into my work. So when you play, I think that's the best, that when you're working, that's also happy accidents. When you're playing, that's also when happy accidents happen. So
yeah, I think creativity and play are definitely intrinsically tied together. And I think if you're not allowing yourself to play, at that point, you're no longer being creative, you're just being a technician, you know? Yeah. I like to, and also when I'm drawing, I like to think of like the drawings acting. Like I am sort of proxy in acting with the character, so I have to look at the script and be like, okay, if I were to read and
this.
that's also a form of play, very much.
Yeah.
You know, like when you get up and do the pose that you're about to draw, so you can really feel what that pose is, or what's the best way to do it, you know? Just getting up and doing the pose and then going down to draw it, like you have to play it out, you know?
I'll just do voices in the shower and just like, how would this character talk?
Me too. Sometimes I just do voices in the shower to amuse myself. Whatever, you know.
All right, we got 2 minutes left. Does anyone have any closing thoughts?
Or questions.
Yeah.
Or ideas, or complaints, or criticisms. You want to throw tomatoes at us? It's all right. I got my hat on. You can take it. We both got our hats on.
We do.
All right, first person to land a quarter in one of our hats wins.
This one gets bonus points because it's so small.
No? All right.
I just spit on my burgers on a burger. I go for it.
You and the cape.
You got a burger for a quarter?
In your own writings, do you think that it's important to have some kind of a similar contrast between your art and the dialogue that's going along with it? Because I have seen comics where the cells are so busy, but then you get to the narratives that are going along with it, and explaining their chores when they got home from
Yep,
work.
yep.
You can't
That's a
stay
good question.
stimulated on the dialogue, but you get lost in the art without having those kind of focal stimulators going along with it.
One thing I think you'll notice in most of my comics, anything that I've written, what I tend to do is I always have 3 narratives. There's the narrative that's happening in the dialogue, the exchange, right? What's unfolding there. There's the narrative that the narrator is providing, which is often either a retrospective or something happening elsewhere or commentary on what has transpired. And then there's the visual narrative, right? So you have those 3 narratives combined, and I do tend to keep it as sparse as I can. I cut it down to like which words are absolutely necessary for this to be a complete sentence. Sometimes I might even use a sentence fragment, you know, if it's gonna get the point across. But boiling down 3 narratives that are interconnected and transposed at their basic components can make a story so much denser and richer while feeling spacious and airy. Like you don't feel like there's 5 paragraphs of text in this one bubble. What the heck? What are they talking about? Like what is so important that it had to be on this one panel, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But instead trying to allow you to not even realize how much story you're getting in one dose, you know, like candy coating that medicine, but really trying to make it like the super ultimate multivite that's gonna kick any cold's ass in the face, you know?
So, going on to
Ass
like
in the face.
ass in the face. Going on to a narrative of talking about a grocery list, I like to play with a person's facial expressions, which is the movement of the mind in Leonardo da Vinci's, saying something, their bodily gesture of like when someone is saying, we need more mayonnaise, and they say mayonnaise or mayonnaise, or they can deliver it in different ways. It's the acting portion.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
definitely.
a contrasting shot with that saying mayonnaise. Why do we need more mayonnaise? And they can have a shot of moldy mayonnaise in a cabinet going, because the other one's past date.
Yeah.
Like something like that. Just making the visuals enhance the dialogue, or you can have the dialogue enhance the visuals. It can be subtle like an anime, where someone could just look off in the distance and there's dialogue saying, he was thinking about his brother, the way he bled on the ground that day, or something like that. So it's, I think it's a contrast between the dialogue and like what's going on the page or the panel.
I think also a lot of times what you'll get is writers that don't necessarily, again, trust their artists. And so instead of telling their artists, hey, this is what's happening in this panel, here's the dialogue, they try to also use the dialogue to explain what's happening in the panel as if the artist they're working with is incompetent. And that's when you get really just boggish storytelling. You know, like it requires a lot of trust in your team to do good writing for comics. And I think that we see that a lot when it's there that the artist is not being trusted by the writer. It's very, very obvious.
Isn't Alan Moore,
I'm not using
Alan,
anyone's names.
Okay. You're more.
No companies, no people.
There's a writer that
Unless
I've heard
it's someone
of.
that I love.
Okay, that's fair enough. You're very kind.
If I'm praising someone, I'll use their name.
Okay.
If I'm criticizing someone, I'll say this person. You
Okay.
know?
This
this
person
company.
I've heard about is so meticulous in his writing and descriptions that it does remind me of the stifling of the artist a little bit. There's no wiggle room.
Yeah.
It's kind of like writing a script for an actor. You hired an actor there, trying to think. Jack Black. You hired Jack Black to bring his Jack Blackness to
And if
the
you don't
script.
let him ad-lib, you're not getting the Jack Blackness.
Like Jack Black, I want you to quote this line from Shakespeare. I'm not going to have you like be a Shakespearean actor. I want you to be Jack Black.
Right. Right.
And that's the same with artists and writers. Okay. Actually, we are 4 minutes over. Thank you so much for coming to our panel, you
Yeah.
guys.
Thanks for the great comments and questions.
Yes.
Really appreciate